I feel that any of the projects that I've done really successfully, it's because I went all in on the project. You learn all about the people, you get into a rhythm, and it's not something that you can just drop in and out of. You have to do this continuous coverage to really get good results. Don't let any naysayers hold you back. Believe in yourself and just go all in on your project.
Welcome to the Nieman Storyboard Podcast, where we dig into the craft of journalism and storytelling. I'm Mark Armstrong, editor of Nieman Storyboard. This show is brought to you by the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. You can get updates by signing up for our newsletter. Just go to niemanstoryboard.org to sign up. Today, my guest is photojournalist Stephanie Keith, whose latest work became an instantly iconic cover image for New York Magazine. It's the photo of a young girl in tears being pulled away from her father as he was being taken by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, or ICE, in the hallways outside of his immigration hearing at 26 Federal Plaza in New York City. Keith began covering the immigration hearings on her own without a paid assignment after Donald Trump was reelected, and her photos became a cover story for New York Magazine with additional reporting and writing by Andrew Rice and Paula Aceves. Keith and I talked about the unique power of photojournalism to tell a story, how she thinks about her own role, and how she thinks about the assignments that she decides to cover. In addition to her latest work covering the ICE arrests, she's covered protests from Standing Rock to Occupy Wall Street. Keith started working for news organizations in 2015 as a freelance photojournalist in New York City after she graduated from NYU with a master's in photography and after raising 2 children. She's received many honors for her work, and she was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for breaking news as part of the New York Times team covering a Bronx fire in 2022. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Stephanie Keith. So Stephanie, thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, at the time of this recording, it has been a very busy week for you. It was election week in New York.
Yes.
Where did that send you?
I was at the Mamdani watch party, which was very exciting.
Yes. What was that like?
It was just filled with hopeful energy, and they called the race pretty early, and really, I think, surprised me and a lot of people that they called it so early, and people were just freaking out. They were so happy. It was really nice to be around that energy, this like hopeful, happy energy.
And you've covered him during the campaign too, right?
Yeah, a little bit on and off, you know. Now looking back, I wish I'd done more, but yeah, I always enjoy covering him. You know, he always has, you know, lots of smiles and has interesting things to say. And, you know, I just love to see how magnetic he is and how appreciated he is by his constituents.
How do you decide, like, when something's an event, you know, in a campaign? It's a long campaign. Obviously, election night's a big night, but how do you decide when you're going to jump into an assignment like that? I'm
not sure. I mean, doing the ICE detentions was like the number one thing for me. So I didn't want anything really to like interfere with that. But after the New York Magazine piece was published, then I felt like I needed a break. And it seemed that the ICE detentions were kind of becoming less and less. I think it has to do with the government shutdown. So it seemed like it was even not much less of a story. They're barely even detaining anybody these last couple of weeks. So then I felt like it was a good time to switch over to something else, you know. So then I started following Mamdani. I got on his press list so I could find out where he was going to be the following day, and then went from there, you know. And I didn't cover everything because, you know, I had a lot of other stuff going on, but I covered, you know, what I could.
Yeah, and you mentioned a different energy and needing a little bit of a break and a change of pace from what you'd been covering down at Federal Plaza.
Yeah, I really needed a break, and the Mom Donnie energy was just a perfect antidote because, it was really like hopeful and fun, and he's just such a smiler. He has such this infectious, smiling energy that people really respond to. So it was just, literally the opposite of those long days standing around in the hallways with those masked ICE agents, which was just such a depressing, environment to be in all the time. So that was the antidote because it was outside and with lots of people and everyone's happy and hopeful. It was literally the antidote because people, I think, voted for Mamdani because he would not be like Eric Adams and he would not make a deal with ICE. And maybe people were kind of hopeful that all this ICE action might, maybe, if, with Mamdani, take a back seat.
Well, I'd like to talk about the portfolio that you published for New York Magazine. I think the photo on the cover and the presentation of the entire portfolio is very powerful and moving. How did this project start for you in the first place?
Well, it started as a germ of an idea, right after Donald Trump was elected. I'd been to a lot of Trump rallies previously, and I'd heard all the xenophobic rhetoric that he promulgates, how the evil migrants are doing these terrible things to American citizens and just whipping the crowd up into a fever. So when he was elected, I thought that it was going to be a really big issue. So immediately I wanted to figure out how to cover ICE and how to cover how he's going to start deporting millions of people out of the United States. So, and I also, I live in New York, and I've lived in New York for 30 years, and I love my immigrant communities. I've covered them extensively, for years and years and years and years, all the celebrations and the parades and, religious ceremonies. And just the thought of those communities being ripped apart by ICE was really a horrible idea for me. So originally I just would sit in my car and just kind of hope to hear about some activity either through one of the community groups I joined or through social media, but that did not produce any results at all. It was I felt like I was chasing a ghost. I never saw ICE anywhere in the community, even though I knew they were sort of becoming a little more active. So then one day there was a big protest outside one of the federal immigration courthouses, and people, for some reason that day, I don't know what kicked it off, but they figured out that ICE was detaining immigrants inside the courthouses. They had sent some of their people in as court watchers, and they saw them detaining immigrants who'd come to their court hearings. And that was a new thing, and it was new. This was at the end of May, and they hadn't been doing that, and that was their new way of trying to get as many immigrants as possible, is just wait at the courthouse and just have them come straight to them, So the activists were the ones that figured that out first. They had a big protest outside that facility, and when the migrants were leaving in vans, they would stop. They would sit in the street and try to stop the van, and there was this sort of a melee in the street, and there was a lot of arrests. NYPD came and arrested all of the activists that had been blocking the vans. So it was a very emotional moment. And then right after that happened, when we found out that they were arresting immigrants, the couple of friends of mine went to there's 3 buildings that have immigration courts, and the protest was at one, and then there's 2 others in a different area in Manhattan, and my friends went into the courthouses and found out or figured out there was a loophole in those courthouses that the the corridors are public space. And by being public space, we were allowed as news photographers with our press passes to go in and do news gathering activities. Like those corridors in the courthouses, it was like being on the sidewalk outside. It was just the same sort of public space. So my friends figured that out, and kudos to them. And then when they told me about that, I was like, okay, I have to do this. This is like my story. I want to go and photograph this. So I started.
What month was this?
This was like right in the beginning of June, the first week of June. And I spent the whole first 2 weeks of June going every single day. And I thought, well, when we publish our photos, it's going to be like this big story. And then stupidly, I thought, oh, well, if they find out, there's going to be all these protests and maybe they'll stop, arresting the immigrants. But I mean, that didn't stop. They just kept going. And, all through June, all through July, and all through August, I pretty much went, not every day, but almost every day. I wasn't on assignment and I wasn't, making any money doing this. I just felt like this was like a really important story and it needed to be documented. And, sure, it's a bummer to not be on assignment or not make any money on it. But in another sense, it's also if you can afford to do that, it's very freeing because you can make your own editorial decisions and you can control your images. You keep the copyright and, you can do whatever you want with your images, where if you're on assignment for some big news organization, you might not be able to do that. So I actually was glad that in the end that I made that decision to just go there completely on my own and document. It was like a risk because, it might not have paid off, but then in the end it did when New York Magazine published it as a portfolio.
Yeah, and up to that point, you definitely had them on your Instagram. Were agencies also picking up stuff sort of here and there leading up to the New York Magazine piece?
Well, not really, because the agencies had their own staffers that they would send. For me, would not have gone as a freelancer if I was going to lose my copyright. So I wouldn't have agreed to do it. I did agree to list some of my photos in the beginning with Getty Images, but as a contributor, I keep my copyright. So it was only in September there were two big events that I agreed to do it as what's called a stringer, and then I did lose my copyright for those two events, but I felt like the events were like big stories that needed to get out to the world right away. So I kind of took a personal hit by doing that, but I felt like I needed to be in service to the story. And one of the instances was when the woman Monica, who was a mother, was separated from her husband and she got thrown to the floor by the ICE agent. And another time was just a couple days later when the journalists were also thrown to the floor by a different ICE agent. So both those instances of violence, I felt like those stories needed to get out right away. And, Getty Images certainly is, has the facility to get those videos and photos out to a worldwide audience. Much better than I would.
Can you take me through what it's like in those early days and weeks when you're sort of planting yourself in that corridor, and how long are you there for, and sort of how are you going about your work? You're obviously meeting a lot of people in those corridors too, right?
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, there were very few photographers because people didn't really know about it so much. But once the story got out, then all of a sudden, there were tons of photographers. And then it became, harder to work when there were so many people there. But in the early days, it was just, a couple of us, and we made like a little WhatsApp group. There were the two buildings that we focused on right next to each other, and some people would go to the one building and the other people would go to the other building, and we'd share information about where the agents were. And we sort of figured out, sort of like a rhythm. The ICE agents basically follow the judges, what judges in which courtrooms have cases on which days. So on Mondays, it was always a pretty slow day, and then Tuesday, there would be these certain courtrooms that had like a lot of cases, and Wednesday would be the different courtrooms, and Thursday, so you just get into this rhythm. You go there, the building opens at 8, and so you line up with everybody else and go in there. And on 26 Federal, you go to either 12th floor or the 14th floor. Those are where all the cases are. And you just sort of look to see where the ICE agents are. And you sort of, bet on, I'm going to stay here on the 12th floor. Oh, I'm going to go up to the 14th floor, or something like that. And when you get there early enough, you can see the people arriving, and you can kind of get a sense of who's coming in that day, like if there's like single men, or if there's families, or, single women, or where they're from. Are they African or from Haiti, or are they from South America, just to get like a sense, because sometimes when someone's detained, you only have those like 30 seconds with that person, and then they're gone. Originally, when we started going there, it was pretty much only single people is who they would take, So sometimes you'd see this single man who looks like he's from South America, and I'd just be like, oh no. Like I would just get like a pit in my stomach thinking, oh yeah, they're going to take him, And in the beginning, it seemed that they wouldn't take families, or there wasn't a lot of family separations in the beginning. And then I think what happened is that the word started getting out that there were all these detentions happening at 26 Federal. So fewer people were coming in for their cases. Some judges allow what's called WebEx, so you can do your case from home on the internet, and more people started doing that. So if they're not present in the courthouse, they can't be detained. So the amount of people they could detain started like steadily going down, and even the agents were saying, yeah, this is winding up, or this is, not what it used to be, or, it definitely was going down. And I mean, I'm not 100% certain. I can only say what I saw, but it seemed that in order to keep up their quota, they started to go after anyone they could, including families. Because I didn't really see very many family separations in the beginning, but as the months went on, then there were the more and more family separations, and those are the ones that are very wrenching and dramatic, and the kids are there, and those are the ones that are really, really hard to watch.
Are you able to communicate with the families? Were you able to get to know any of the families as this was happening, or as, a parent or a partner is in their hearing?
Well, when the people arrive, you really have no idea who the agents are going to take that day. Like, for example, the day that cover for New York Magazine happened, we saw that family arrive, and they were like already crying and hugging even before they went into the courtroom. Like they kind of knew something was up. I mean, I don't know how they knew, but it seemed like they knew something could have happened. And right after them was a family from Haiti, and a mom and a dad and kids. And they took the man from the Ecuadorian family, but they let the family from Haiti go. And it's kind of like, why did they take that one person and not take anyone from the other family? Like, we never knew what the criteria was for why someone was detained and why someone else wasn't detained. I mean, we knew they had a list because every day the agents would stand around with this stack of papers that had like a photo on it and a name, and it had which courthouse, which courtroom, which judge, and the time of their hearing. And so they had these lists of people that were their targets. Now, who makes that list and how someone gets on that list, it was very unclear to the photographers. Like, we were not privy to that decision-making process. So it always seemed like courthouse roulette. You show up and maybe you would be let go. The people would be let go. They'd be crying in the elevator out of just sheer relief that they weren't detained. Or the family would be crying in the elevator going down because the father had been taken away from the family. You never knew which way it was going to go.
Yeah.
It was an extremely nerve-wracking experience for anyone who had to go through it.
You know, you mentioned the photo that is the cover of New York Magazine. Can you tell me a little bit more about your thoughts in that moment as this is happening, as you're shooting this?
Yeah, well, my personal belief in photography is that it's super important to show the emotions of what people are going through. You know, because you're there to show the world what's going on, because not everyone can be there. So I want to show the emotions so that the people looking at the photos can feel the same emotion. They can feel that outrage. They can feel that sadness, that humiliation, all those things, so that they can relate to what's going on. They can relate to the people who are experiencing this. So I remember that day very clearly. I remember that the family arriving and they're all hugging, and a lot of times with the ICE agents, they had this, what it's called a tell, you know, like a poker tell. The person would arrive and they'd all like start looking frantically at their papers and like looking up and then start like whispering to each other. And then you're like, oh, okay, I think they're going to take that guy, you know. So they identified him on the paper and they're all talking and da-da-da. And then they come up with a plan of how they're going to do the separation if it's a family, or if they're going to go down this elevator or that staircase. You know, they all try to make a plan, you know. So they did that when that family arrived. So I was like, I felt like, okay, I'm going to stay here outside this courthouse and see how this plays out, because it's rare where you get to tell the entire story of the family, because there's so many people that come to the courthouse. You have no idea who they're going to take. So, you know, you don't necessarily say, oh, this is the family when they arrive, this is what happened, you know. So this is the one of the few times where I'm like, this is the family as they arrived, you know, so I could walk through the entire process. Because for me, this is a little bit of a digression. I'll come back to the rest of the explanation. That after a while, I felt that just taking photos of just a single detention of someone, grabbing them and taking, was like not doing it for me. I felt like, you know, it's important to show these people. It's important to witness what's happening to them and witness their humanity, and it's a sign of respect to, you know, but I wanted to do more of a story, you know, to get people more involved rather than just detention. I wanted to have more going on. So when this family arrived and they were already crying and hugging, they seemed like a very close-knit family. I was like, okay, I'm just going to stay here and just see what happens with this one family and just tell their story, what happened on this day. And I wasn't going to be distracted by, other agents on a different floor and their different detention, this and that. I just want to see what happens to this family. So they went into the courtroom, and then the moment they came out, they came up to Dad to take him. And, I was right there because I had been standing there for 2 hours, just waiting to see what was happening to this one family. And then we saw the daughter, in anguish, grabbing at her father and then trying to pull him back. And then an ICE agent grabbing the daughter and throwing her down the hall to the rest of the family. And, and then instead of following the detention of the man, which is important, but I just wanted to focus on the family. So I just kept my camera trained on them to see what was their reaction, because I feel that, the detentions are important, but what about the people that are left behind? Like, their family is essentially destroyed now. How are they gonna feel? How are they gonna cope? And then they went down the elevator, and I followed them down the elevator, but there was another journalist that was already speaking with them, and so they wanted to stay with that. But I was able to get some information about the family. I definitely, not just me, but other photographers there, we really, it really does affect us seeing these families torn apart. And we want to follow the families, and we want to try to help them as much as possible. And there are means of helping them. There's a father, a priest from a church who is very hooked in with the whole immigrant process and has access to lawyers and really does help people. So we try to give them information about him and, just try to do whatever we can to help them. And because it is, really heart-wrenching to see. I remember that day, I remember staying so focused and photographing the family and all the way to the elevator, and then they went down. And then right after the elevator doors closed, I remember just bursting into tears. It was so sad. You don't feel it right in the moment, but right after the moment, then you're like, oh wow, that was so sad. It was devastating. So I'm a mother, I have 2 kids. I can't imagine being separated from them. Just seems so awful.
Do we know what's happened to the family since then?
I mean, I don't know what's happened to that family, because the journalist who got access to that family is not really sharing his access with me. So we did manage to relay some messages to the family through him, but he wouldn't give us direct access to the family, which, I can understand. He wants to protect the family. But before New York Magazine published that photo on the cover, they made sure that they contacted the family and made sure it was okay with them that New York Magazine was doing that. So we were able to relay messages to them, and they relayed back to us through this other journalist.
Yeah, I was curious, what we can know and learn about these families and these moments after they happen. So that's helpful to understand.
Yeah, I mean, other families I've been able to stay in touch with, just not that family, because some other families go to that priest's church. He has a church, and they have services on Sundays, And sometimes I go to those services, and sometimes those families also come to those services. So you're able to like talk to them like outside of that situation and, ask how they are and what's going on. So, I mean, I learned recently that another one of the people I photographed, Monica, who was, thrown to the floor by the ICE agent, she was reunited with her husband.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so that is like amazing, and I'm so happy for her. And, she's a real fighter, so I'm really, really was so happy. So we do keep in touch with the families that we can keep in touch with. Some of them just don't want, it's such a traumatic time, and then suddenly there's a journalist asking for their phone number. They're just like, but some of them want involvement, and then you can find out what happens to them. And then there's also court observers, and they keep tabs on them, and they can sometimes look up the cases in the ICE files and find where they're being detained and when their next hearing is. So you can find out something, if you stay in touch with the family. If it's a single person and they're detained and then whisked away, it's almost impossible to stay in touch with that person because, how are we going to get information after the fact?
As a photojournalist, you're putting yourself in these difficult and traumatic situations. And you spoke to this a little bit, which is being a witness or bearing witness. Is that a big part of what has driven your work over your career? And how did you get into photojournalism in the first place?
I think I always thought I was going to be like a documentary photographer and do like documentary stories. Like I have a degree in anthropology, and I thought, I would just be like an anthropologist with a camera. But that's not really a thing, it turns out. And in order to make money, you have to work for newspapers. So then I was very fortunate that when I got out of photography school, I was able to start working for newspapers right away. And I pretty much learned about photojournalism like on the job. And I always had this thing like I'm there for like the underdog. Like if there's like injustice somewhere, like I want to be there to show it because, I feel like I have a very strong like moral code, and I feel that I want to use my camera to show what I think is right and what I think is wrong. And I spent 6 weeks at Standing Rock in 2016, and that was also very similar. I was just very upset with the way the Native Americans were being portrayed by the white society in North Dakota and South Dakota, and I really wanted to go there and try to be a bridge and show the injustices that were happening there. So that was a big part of my experience. And I also spent a long time documenting Occupy Wall Street, so have a history of documenting protest movements that are protesting for a better future, cleaner environment, against inequity. And then this came up, and it would just, seemed so unfair. I just wanted to show these horrors that are happening to these people in a way that could help maybe galvanize some action against it. I think if more people knew about it, that the less likelihood that it could go on and continue. So I definitely see my camera as kind of a way to try to right some wrongs, or at least I try to think of it like that.
You mentioned early on at Federal Plaza where you're like, if this gets found out, then something will happen. Was there a frustration? I know a lot of journalists are frustrated that things don't change as quickly as they would like them to change, or when something is exposed, there's sometimes not accountability immediately or maybe ever. I guess, how do you think of your work when it comes to, questions like that?
Well, for one thing, when you photograph, you're really photographing like the truth. You can't you're not setting things up or anything. So it's important to, even if things don't change right away, it's still important to create a record of the truth. For example, like on January 6th, if there had been no photojournalists there, can you imagine what the narrative would have looked like? The photojournalists are so important. People don't understand how important they really are for creating a history of just the truth of what happened in these situations. So I'm happy to be a part of that, creating that narrative, and I hope that things change, but I'm also a realistic person. I know that, we're living in the Trump era, and, it's going to take a lot for things to change. But if inaction is a cop-out, you have to do what you can if you want to be invested in having a better future. So, and I feel like this is my way of doing my part.
Absolutely. And I think, the thing that struck me, especially seeing your New York Magazine piece, was that even if we've seen bits and pieces of it on social media or different photos and images, the packaging and presentation, like when that was put on the cover, I'm a fan of print. And so like seeing a photo in print with a cover treatment is really powerful. What did you feel when you saw that?
I thought, I think working with Jody Kwan from New York Magazine was such a privilege, for her to edit my work was fantastic, and she's really like a genius as far as I'm concerned. And she was so painstaking about looking. I showed her I think 450 photos, which is like a lot of photos to look at, and I think she was even hungry for more and more and more. She really, really wanted to understand what was going on. So that was a long discussion and looking at all the photos before she came up with the idea to do that cover. And I think even in New York Magazine, there was a lot of discussion about having that cover. But I think it was important because it seems like that is the height of anguish, what that girl was going through. And that is, at the height of anguish, it's going to make people feel something. And that's for me, the whole point of doing photography is to make people feel something, to get a reaction from them. And that photo definitely would. So, I was really glad that they picked that for the cover, because the other thing they were thinking about was doing a cover where it was just the empty hallways. So I'm so glad they picked the emotional moment over the empty hallway scenario.
And then you also worked with some reporters at New York Magazine as well. What's it like to collaborate with reporters? Obviously, they may be coming at it at a different period or reporting their own material as well. What is a collaboration like in a situation like this?
Well, I love working with reporters, and I kind of wish I could have worked with reporters more often, because, you're separated from doing everything when you're a photographer. When you're a photographer, you're not in the courtroom. You could go in the courtroom if you put your camera away, but then you don't have your camera, So the reporter doesn't have the camera, so the reporter goes into the courtroom and can really hear the case, can hear what this person says, why they need to have asylum, and a lot of these asylum cases are very important and very real. And as a photographer, we're in the hallways and we're not hearing that. We don't know about what's going on in the courtroom. So we're kind of, cut off from that. So when you work with a reporter, the reporter can be inside the courtroom and can find out what is going on with these people. They can find out the names, they can find out all this information. And so for me, I love that, because I think it's important to know the backstory, important to know where these people are from, where they're, what their names are. Like, I think that's important, and it's hard as a photographer just standing in the hallway, seeing this emotional things happening. You're not really stopping and saying, oh, so can you give me your name? Or, oh, can you tell me your back? You know what I mean? And the ICE is also in the hallways and not in the courtroom. And one of the lawyers was saying that the photographers shouldn't ask their respondents where they're from, because that might incriminate them to ICE. So if you're a reporter and you're inside the courtroom and ICE isn't there, then you can get the information without then incriminating them to ICE by asking them the information in the hallways in front of ICE. So for me, I wish I could have worked with a reporter the whole time. I think the story would have been much richer and had more depth had we been able to do that. But I think Andrew Rice did a great job. He was there for one day, and then Paula did some other background, and I don't know how she was able to get all the information she got. She's just an incredible researcher and reporter, and I'm really grateful for her to do all the back reporting so that we do know more about these people.
This is Paula Aceves?
Yes.
We haven't really talked about the editing after the fact, like how you tell a story through even the photo selection. It's like you've captured a bunch of stuff. Do you then edit down, or are you sending like giant batches? Is there a point in which you sit down and edit? New York Magazine aside, which is obviously like a collaborative project, but in other assignments, do you have an editing process in terms of your photo selects?
Yeah, I definitely have an editing process. We all have to edit our work before we send it to the agency or before we put it on Instagram or whatnot. But I feel that I'm a pretty good editor, especially like on a daily assignment. I can pick out the strongest photos or the photos that can tell the story. But to photo edit like a large body of work and be able to pick out the strongest photos and the quiet moments and then be able to string it together in a story, I feel like that is like a whole art form, and I am not a photo editor, although I think if I did it more, I'd probably get better at it. But the photo editors who do that, that is their art form, and they are so good at it. And I think Jody Kwan is just an absolute master at that. And her edit, of the New York Magazine was fantastic, and I felt so lucky and privileged to be able to have someone who's such a photo editing artist look at my work and edit it, because her edit was definitely different than the edit that I had done, and I felt that her edit was definitely stronger than mine. So I felt like I learned a lot by looking at her edit.
You mentioned being mindful of what you actually ask the families in the corridor. How do you approach questions of agency and consent when you're shooting people?
Yeah, I definitely feel that, consent is an issue for sure. I know some old school photographers who would say, oh, consent is like a newfangled idea and, I'm a news photographer and I can take photos of anything I want to take photos of, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not one of those people, but I wouldn't say I'm 100% on the consent side either. I'm like somewhere in between. Like, there were a couple of times, for example, where one time there was a family separation and the woman was inside the waiting room and she was kind of like crying very loudly and very, very upset. And then when she finally sort of calmed down and was leaving, she requested the photographers not to take her photo. And then all the photographers honored her request and nobody took her photo. And she was able to leave. And so we didn't report on her because she asked us not to. And there was another time where there was a woman who was separated from her family. It was a woman, not a man taken. And it turned out, and everybody took her photo and took photos of the whole thing. And then later on, we learned from the priest who had spoken to the husband that she has a very, very sensitive asylum case, which I won't go into the details. And then the father asked us not to put the photos on social media or not file them. He could not have it become a viral moment because that would threaten the life of that person. So we all, the photographers, just agreed not to, because it would harm her directly. So we all took I didn't post any photos, and the couple of agency photographers, they killed the photos that they had filed. So when there's stuff like that happens, we will, honor their requests. If there's a specific request from the people themselves, we will honor that for sure. But I think a lot of people actually want to have their story told. I think some people don't understand that, but there are people that want what's happening to them. They want people to know. Like Monica, she wanted people to know how badly she was treated. And in fact, my video of the situation is going to be used in her lawsuit that she has coming up, or if not a lawsuit, then her husband's asylum request, something of that sort. So my reporting is going to hopefully help her case and help her, get asylum here in this country.
You mentioned taking video. We're kind of in this era where everyone has a camera on their phone. Does that change how you view the work you're doing as a professional with higher-end equipment, and how you approach assignments or how you train your eye on what to look for?
I mean, I feel like at some point during the story, not at the beginning, but later on, I felt that doing video was important. So I bought a little contraption to put on top of my camera, and I always had my phone on top of my still camera in case something happened. So when the Monica situation happened, I was shooting stills at the same time as doing video. I did them both at the same time. And it's a little bit tricky because, you can't just jerk your camera around. You have to be kind of smoother, and so it takes a little time to get used to it. But I felt that if you want to have a viral moment these days, you got to do video, straight up, you got to do video. So I feel that my video of Monica or my video of the journalist being pushed to the ground, those wouldn't have been, other people also did some video of Monica, but I think those wouldn't have been as viral of moments had there been no video. If it had just been stills, I don't think people would have seen the motion or heard the cries and, really been immersed in the moment as if it wasn't video. For me, it was so important to also do video in those moments. And I feel like with the iPhone, sorry, Apple, but for stills, the iPhone is terrible, But for video, it's really good. I don't feel like I'm competing with, anyone with an iPhone, because the iPhone it's never going to be great, But the video is, I guess what I'm saying is it's so important. And I've noticed recently that a lot of the other photographers who hadn't been doing video are all doing video now.
And are you shooting them vertical?
I'm shooting it horizontal.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if I shoot vertical, I can only really use it like for myself personally. But if I want to sell it to broadcast, and have it really seen, then it has to be horizontal. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely suggest to young photojournalists out there, shoot horizontal, because you can always crop it vertical, but you can't go back if you shoot it vertically.
That's great advice. And speaking of advice, you mentioned obviously Federal Plaza, Standing Rock, Occupy Wall Street. What advice do you have for emerging journalists, all journalists, on how to cover an event like that and how to mentally prepare and then how to logistically prepare?
I feel that any of the projects that I've done really successfully, it's because I went all in on the project. I didn't do it like a little here, a little there. I went all in. Like Occupy Wall Street, I went down to Zuccotti Park every single day for months. At Standing Rock, I lived, in North Dakota for 6 weeks straight. And for Federal Plaza, I went down almost every day for like 4 months. So I think it's the all-in aspect that really produces results, because you learn all about the people, you get into a rhythm, and it's not something that you can just drop in and out of. You have to do this continuous coverage to really get good results. So I think if you're really into a project, don't let any naysayers hold you back. Just believe in yourself and just go all in on your project.
I love that. And then to that same point, how do you practice self-care?
In the summer, all the public pools in New York are open, so I would go swimming every day after coming back from the courthouse. And, I also have 2 kids. And I know it doesn't sound like self-care, but my kids, they need my attention. And so they kind of completely take me out of the other world, and I need to focus on them and what they're doing and how they're doing. So it's like I can't dwell on these things all day long, because I have a lot of other responsibilities, like other people that rely on me.
Stephanie, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you again for this, and thank you for all of your great work.
Oh, and thank you. And thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks again to Stephanie for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you like what we're doing with Nieman Storyboard, leave us a written review and a rating in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also share this podcast with a friend. We'll see you soon.